What's next for IT? In today's economy, technology touches every aspect of the day-to-day operations of business. There has never been more pressure on IT to deliver for our organizations. So what can we expect over the next decade? We need to think differently about how we approach our work to continue to thrive into the future. This requires all of us to be intentional in how we look at our role going forward. Smart IT is an approach to getting the important things done by transforming the way we think, work, and lead. And now, let's disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk the smart IT way. And welcome to another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. Today, I'd like to welcome Daniel Stillman to the show. He designs conversations for a living. He is the founder of the Conversation Factory, which we'll get into more during this show. He works with organizations like Google, Nike, and Visa. And he also hosts his own podcast, the Conversation Factory podcast itself. So, Daniel, welcome to the show today.
William, thanks for having me. I really like conversations, as you can imagine. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas and to jam with you.
So I think we met a few years ago back in New York when I flew out to hang out with you and some other people for a workshop. Yeah, I think it's been a while. I think that was before the pandemic.
Yeah, I like to say it's been a pandemic and a half. Those are the good old days.
Well, what's interesting is I never would have thought I would have went to such a workshop. Before, didn't know anything about facilitation, didn't know anything about conversation design. It was just, you go out there, you work with your coworkers and your colleagues, you work with the business and your clients, and stuff just happens. So I said, when I designed this new podcast of Smart IT, we're kind of looking at what the next 10 years looks like. How do all IT professionals up-level their skill sets? So everything from analysis to digital fluency, business literacy, team building, leadership, and communications. So when I saw that, I said, you know what? I got to have Daniel on the show to talk about this because, like I said, when I heard about conversations and getting better, that's one thing. But designing conversations, oh, wow, that just kind of blew my mind. So I said, kind of like, let's start. Daniel, first of all, how did you even think about this concept of design for conversations?
Well, thank you for that introduction, William. And I'll just say, it blew my mind the first time I heard it, too. So, I came from the world, my first degree is in physics. And, then I went into industrial design. And I spent a lot of years in product innovation, but that was physical products. And I remember the first time somebody was talking about a digital product. And I was like, you're not a product designer. I'm a product designer. I design physical products. But the reality is, the physical products we use all have digital products on them. And the interactions that we have with them are much more important than just holding them in our hands. And I think that was my first awakening when somebody says, oh, there's this thing, it's called interaction design. People who design human-computer interactions. So they say, well, I am an interaction designer. And I was like, wow, that's a whole thing. And my company, the company I was working at the time, said, this is a whole new world. We're designing the physical form and someone else is designing the interactions of these devices. We need to figure out this next wave of the thing. And then there was just years and years where it was like, well, actually, no, we're experienced designers. We're customer experience designers. And there were even people who started to say well, actually, what we're doing is we're designing services, right? And each of these lenses on design so important and just helped me see things differently. And there came this point where I was working with this organization in Australia, and they called their facilitative practice, where they would bring teams together inside of an organization or between organizations to have visionary, transformative conversations about the direction their companies, projects, their industry needed to go. And they called what they were doing conversation design. And it did blow my hair back to you. I was like, you're not designers. And how do you design a conversation? What is it a conversation even made out of? And it really did start me on this multi-year journey where I started having conversations with people about what does it mean? And how do you think it works? What do you think you're doing? And I think I have this perspective now, William, that like we are all designing conversations. It's like the old program or be programmed. Like every conversation has a design, and the design is either fit to purpose, is getting us what we need and want out of it, or it's falling short. And, you know, the cost is really huge because I'm sure everyone who's listening to this has a lot of meetings. Those are all conversations. And, you know, you just add up the salaries, big cost. If you add up the opportunity cost missed of just like, if you're a global team and there's only a couple of hours, you can meet a couple of times a week, all synchronous together to have an important conversation, and you don't land where you need to get to, like, it is huge. And if you just Google, like, what is the overall cost of crappy meetings in the world, there's many people who've tried to estimate the billions, but it's clearly a lot. And so I think everybody is already designing their conversations. They're either doing it intentionally, thoughtfully, effectively, or they're just sort of, like you said, we're just hacking it. We're getting together and we're just doing it. And you know what it's like the first time you see somebody who does something really cool, creative, clever, innovative to get people to align or discuss, deliberate, decide. You're like, that worked. And then you just go and you just copy it. And that's how I think these sort of new ways of being and working and doing disseminate is organically. But we can obviously do better on purpose, which is what I define design as, right? Making things better on purpose.
Well, that's interesting.
That's my opening argument. What do you say?
Well, I love it because the old famous quote about the illusion of communications, you know, just because two people are talking.
There's so many of them. There's one, it's like, I know you think you heard what I meant to say, but what you heard isn't what I wanted to mean. You know, there's like 6 or 7 versions of that, and it's real. And there's I don't know if this is the time to say this, but I feel like there's some physics working against us in the reality of conversations. Like, and I come to this from a perspective of like, what's the material we're designing from? And we think at 4,000 words per minute. Like, there's just these, it's very hard to study it. Various people have attempted to. We can definitely think a lot faster than we talk, and at least an order of magnitude faster than we can talk 100, 125 words per minute. We can read at 250 words per minute. And so literally every time anybody has said anything to you, they have not said everything that they intend to or want to or have thought about the topic. It's the talking thinking gap. So anybody who's ever felt misunderstood, that's something that is just endemic. It's built into the system. There is no way someone could have, in fact, heard everything, because you couldn't have said it all in the time you have. Plus, you know, there's the loss of, when as you say, I said something, you heard something. Well, I didn't say everything I wanted to say about it because I can't. It's not possible. And you didn't hear everything I said or meant because you've got your own conversation going on in your head too. So I think we really have to design spaces that work for the neurological, biological reality of the situation.
And I'm just starting to think about the modern IT team. Like, it's even more complex than it was a decade ago. So now it's the small team interacting among themselves, people interacting with their managers, multiple IT teams coming together. And then you pivot to, let's talk to the business. So you got all these communications and meetings and, you know, people opening their mouths back and forth all over the place. So it's interesting that you said we can't say everything we're thinking, and we have a whole lot of meetings, yet the main point is still being lost. So this is just like a very challenging human aspect. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. And also I think we're also, you know, a lot of people are living in what I would call 30-minute meeting culture. And it's hard to like get into the groove in 30 minutes. I'm not saying don't have 30-minute meetings. I think if it's a small group of people, very small group of people with a very clear challenge or very clear, well-designed conversation, it's possible to be effective. But when one person needs to hop late or jump in early, like, well, what conversation are we really having? So is it actually just a 20-minute conversation? And every time somebody shows up late, you kind of have to like weave them into the conversation. And so I think it's a fundamentally difficult situation to try and have a coherent, effective conversation when people are like coming in and out of the conversation the whole time. And this is like the cat herding challenge. So when I say design, like this is the way we are designing it. Our organizations are currently set up to maintain this status quo, right? Because people say, well, I can't ask for more time for people. I can't control people showing up late or leaving early. And it's like, well, until you figure out how to design a better container for more effective conversations, we're going to stay stuck in this hamster wheel of finishing our work after hours, having conversations with people, catching them up, reconnecting with them, being the weavers of these webs of conversation. It is non-trivial, and it's work, right? I mean, this is the work, I think, of every competent knowledge worker, professional, to kind of be a gatherer, to be a host. That's maybe another way to talk about a designer of conversations. Like, it's your job to host these conversations, because otherwise you can't get anything done. I think this is also something leaders do. Is like, we're building the culture of the organization one conversation at a time. We're teaching people how to act. We're showing them what the company is. And there are tons of studies that show that people don't leave companies; they leave managers.
Well, it's interesting.
Anyway, that's
actually more fascinating when you think about this, because if no one knows you can design it on purpose, it can just lead to a lot of frustration, because like the default mode. So we got into the 30-minute conversation. We didn't cover what we needed to. So we had to extend the conversations. Then we got to do the follow-up emails, the follow-up meetings. But if no one actually stops and thinks like, is there a better way? Then it's like, this is just status quo. Like, everywhere we work, this is just the way it's going to be. So it's just all this frustration just builds up. So I was, so do you get that aha moment quite a bit when you meet people and you describe what they're feeling every day, and they say, you know what? There's a better way.
Yeah.
And we can actually be intentional about it. Are you used to that aha moment at this point?
Yeah. I mean, lately when I share the 4,125 gap to people, especially for technical people, they get that like the operating system, like the technical parameters of the thing are set up, I mean, in a way, against us, right? The misunderstanding is the default, right? And I think it create this moment of realization that I have to put in significantly more intentionality to redesign the operating system of the conversation, because the latency in the system is such that it is not natural for us to get to clarity and alignment without intentionality and work. I think people hear that and they go, wow, I didn't realize that I had to do more. I thought it was fine. And that there's something more that's possible, but only if we're willing to apply significant effort and a transformational vision, I think, to the situation.
Well, it sounds like this is a great opportunity from a new style of leadership. And it's really distributed leadership, right? We're talking about anybody who creates the meeting invite, right? So somebody.
Well, I mean, look, everybody in the conversation is also leading it, right? Because anybody can say anything and they could be like, I disagree, I hate that, or they can leave the Zoom room if they want to. But you're right. Like, the person who's hosting the conversation does have a tremendous opportunity to set the stage for success in the conversation. Sorry, I cut you off. I do that sometimes. That's part of my operating system.
Well, it's interesting because you think about new things that you're listening. You almost store them on the side. I'm going to get back to this. And it's like, oh my God, I need to do a follow-up on these 5 things. And we run out of time.
Well, to that point, William, here's the thing, like, talking about the operating system of the conversation right now, like, we, generally speaking, across most cultures, gap between when one person speaks and the next person, like the gap in turn taking, the fundamental cadence of the conversation is like 400 milliseconds. More than 400 milliseconds, which is like a starter pistol. Yeah. It's like Olympic athlete, like Jackie Joyner Kersey, like fire pistol, girls running. That's fast. That's what we expect, that after William, you ask me a question. If there's that much dead space, it starts to feel awkward.
Yeah.
The right. And so this is just the way we're built. It's cultural and fairly universal across human cultures. The challenge is, even though we can think at 4,000 words per minute, it takes us like 600 milliseconds to think of what we're going to say, which means one of two things. Either we do that in the beginning of when we talk. So we do a lot of ums, we do a lot of, well, you know, we kind of like bumble our way into the first 200 milliseconds of what we're trying to say while we think of something. But usually what's happening, from my experience and from my research, is that halfway through someone speaking, we are already figuring out the trajectory of where they're going.
Interesting.
Like NORAD tracking Santa Claus on Christmas Eve. Like, we are guessing where things are going, because it is how we have survived as human beings, is empathizing with people and trying to guess what they're thinking and figure out where they're going. And how many times, if you've been in an argument with someone, a heated discussion, I know where you're going with this, William. You don't have to finish the dumb thing you're going to say. I'm going to finish your dumb idea for you and tell you what I think about your ideas before you even finish. And then the other person says, no, let me finish. You're like, fine, idiot. I'll let you finish what you're saying. Because halfway through, we are guessing where they're going. And so we're actually not always listening to somebody all the way in. So like, one simple way we can design a conversation for really, really heated conversations, something like rounds, or just, everyone speaks. There's a talking stick. William speaks. William finishes speaking. William, are you complete? I'm complete. All right. Well, then Daniel's going to go now. Daniel's going to speak until he's complete, right? If you're really trying to do, like, for example, a retrospective after a sprint or after a major technical failure, right? You really want to give people the opportunity to say all that they need to say. So one great way to design for this is to just let everyone speak at the same time, quietly, alone, on a piece of paper, right? Thinking alone before thinking together. This is a fundamental way of redesigning every conversation. Okay. Just get everyone to think alone before they think together. And I'm sure people have been in meetings where they've done this, like, with sticky notes, like, write down 2 or 3 sticky notes and then put them on the wall. That works because it allows us to get out what we're going to say. And then when we see what somebody else has said, we can say, oh, I'm thinking of something else. And we add some more to that. So just giving some time to let people think means that the introverts are protected from the extroverts, and the extroverts are protected from themselves, because they don't know. The extroverts are like those of us, show of hands, and people in Radio Land who think out loud, right? How do I know what I think until I see what I say? I can't remember who said that. You Google that. Like, somebody else. This is there are those of us who process verbally. But unfortunately, those of us who process verbally are actually infecting and anchoring the thinking and speaking of the people who need an extra moment to think. So if you're trying to do a retrospective or a post-mortem on an incident, you really want everybody's thinking and you want their honest opinion. And so thinking alone before thinking together is just like a very simple way of doing things that allows everybody space and time to think.
Well, let's bring up a couple of,
I wish more of us had.
Let's bring up a couple of fascinating challenges here. So I think you may have blogged about this recently as well, about this confirming that what you heard is what was intended. So if I go back to the talking stick, so if you said, okay, Daniel, tell me everything you want to say, and you pass it to me, it'll almost feel like I need to confirm I heard what you intended before I can even get to my thoughts. Otherwise, I'll be responding to something that's incorrect.
Yeah. I mean, that's what active listening on the face is, right? It's like, hey, so I heard you say this. Is that right? There's like maybe a varsity level of active listening. I wrote an article about this a few months back. It's called the Golden Listening Triangle. And, it asks you to just go a step deeper and say, reflect, is that right? And you say yes, or you say no, and this, and this. You correct my summary in some way. And then I re-ask. I ask again. So your perspective about this is this. And I ask just in a little bit of a different way. And it's just like a navigator triangulates. You need all of these points on the map to really just know we are in this location, right? You need, latitude, longitude, and altitude, right? We're uniquely positioned. So doing the listening triangle is pushing a little bit faster, further, and a little bit slower than active listening. After you confirm, you re-ask and you try to just dial it in and just zero in on somebody's position. And this is hard to do, especially if there's somebody who's saying something that we don't like, that we don't agree with. And I think this is one of the things, you say that this is a new model for leadership. And I really do believe that leaders are already creating the culture of their teams and their organizations day by day by how they host conversations. Right? Leadership is the ability to create the conditions for a transformative conversation. Like, if you want your team to make better decisions, how are you hosting that space? And this is one of my favorite things to coach leaders on is the meetings, the spaces, the hygiene of their cadence, how they host the most critical conversations about how are we doing? Do you have feedback from me? How are we actually hosting our one-on-ones? How do I host a debate, like a real deliberative debate where we can disagree and then commit? Like, we talk about these things. Like, there's so many articles that you just like scroll through HBR and Entrepreneur. They're like, how to get your team to debate. And it's like, this is where I think there's another model. I can share an article with you about this one. It's called triple loop learning. And it's who is the guy? Not Ed Schein. Chris Argyris, one of these guys who was, has written a lot about organizational transformation and organizational learning. And he talks about these 3 levels of learning. One is doing, like, am I doing the right things to get the goal, the thing that I want? And if I'm not, then I need to rethink what I'm doing, right? So that's the double loop. Am I thinking the right thoughts? Do I have the right frame of mind? Do I have the right assumptions to take the right actions? And single loop learning can be very reactive. Double loop learning is being reflective. But triple loop learning is bringing in aspiration, bringing in reimagination. How am I being? So those 3 levels of being, thinking, and doing are all ways of transforming how things are in an organization. And it's very easy to try and say, well, let's just do the things that we should be doing. But you and I both know that, you could say, oh, well, let's do 20% innovation like Google does. And you could say, well, let's do that program. But if you don't have the mindsets in the organization, the entrepreneurial attitude or the generous attitude and mindsets, people aren't going to actually produce the output that you want them to. And so you can do a think alone, think together model like that, just doing something differently will change how you host your conversations. But if you are showing up as curious and patient, that's a level of being. Can't fake that funk, right? Being curious is something that you be. It's not something you do. And so for leaders, I think one of the biggest challenges is that for many of us, we started as technicians and very few of us were trained to be managers. And it's very easy to get sucked back into the technical side. And it's very easy to assume that the solution is a technical solution. But what that means is that we never are actually coaching our team to figure it out for themselves and to think for themselves. So this is a fundamental way to redesign a conversation. Do I believe that the answer is in me? Do I believe the answer is in them? Or do I believe the answer is in what we call the third body of the group? Right? And if I believe the answer is in me, I will be
very problematic.
Right. I mean, we've all had bosses that believe that they've got the right answer all the time, and that sucks. That's why we get micromanaged, and that's why we leave. And so, if we want to be leaders that grow our teams, we have to make this shift into believing that the answer they get to, with the right coaching and support and the right parameters, will be better than the one that I can do on my own, if only because if I don't do that, then I will forever be pulled back into the weeds.
Right now.
And I can never do the real work of leadership, which is designing the next conversation, being strategic, being visionary, bringing people together, pushing the boundaries. Like, so if I believe that it's me, then it's always going to be me. If I believe that it's them, then I get to create a very, very different context for the kind of conversations. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why a lot of the leaders that I wind up coaching eventually say, you know what I really need to do is I need to learn how to bring this coaching mindset to my teams, because and the only way that they ever will succeed is if they can grow the people underneath them.
It almost goes back to that. What's that other famous line? The smartest person in the room is the room. So some right. Imagine this. Yeah, it's this one person who sends the calendar invite for 20 people, and 20 people come to the meeting, and the one person who started the meeting is telling everybody what he did or she did, and it's very low participation, and they come out. It's like the huge missed opportunity, right? So this person never came into the room thinking, I have 19 other people who to collectively is going to come up with the best answer or the best debates or the best questions.
Yeah.
And it's like a huge miss if they don't understand that.
Yes. And what that person needs to realize, and will hopefully realize at some point, is that they are designing the conditions. They are maintaining their reality. As long as they believe they are the smartest person in the room, they will not create the conditions for them to discover otherwise, because they are lecturing. They're in that mode, right? It is very challenging to switch that modality until they are willing to run an experiment. Say, well, what happens if I step back instead of step forward? What happens if I create the conditions for everyone to speak? I mean, the flip side of the smartest person in the room is the room. I've heard someone else say, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Like
right.
That.
And so that's something at the level of being humble will naturally, automatically shift how someone designs a conversation. If I am designing my conversation from the perspective of I'm smart, you're dumb, then that's where you have the kind of meetings that are status updates meetings. Like, those are command and control meetings. And we all know that those are meetings that could have been an email. And they say, but otherwise, if I don't have these status updates, command and control meetings, nothing will get done. And I say, well, then you've either hired inappropriately for the role, or you've not motivated people properly, or you're not coaching them to value it. Like, there's so many other things. Like, it's like, well, they'll only do it if I force them to do it. You're like, well, then that's a bad job. And that job shouldn't exist, because people love to work. This is like, again, this is theory X versus theory Y. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I forget who the theorist behind it is. It's the idea of, like, are people fundamentally sad, unhappy, and don't like to work, or and have to be forced to do things, or do people naturally like doing things that they like to do? And I think, like, people love to work. People love to create value. And if you can help people see the value in what they're creating, that's leadership, right? And there's a lid for every pot, as my grandmother liked to say. Not everybody likes to do all types of work. Some people do love filling in spreadsheets. Somebody's got to do it, right? And helping somebody understand that even if they don't like to do it, that it's important for something else that they value. Like, that is leadership. That's storytelling. That's leading through narrative, and leading through invitation and motivation. Like, I think it's easy to say, it's hard to do. But I think that shift on the being level of like being humble and being curious, those are very, very helpful places to stand from, and will definitely shift how people redesign their conversations if they're willing to.
Let's go back to one thing you mentioned earlier. You mentioned the introverts and the extroverts. So you now believe
apparently they exist.
So you get the leader who's thinking, okay, the room is the better method versus me. So I'm noticing now the extroverts are 20% of the room. And I'm like struggling to figure out how do I get this extra 80%. So I passed the talking baton, and a lot of people are just uncomfortable participating. Any general thoughts and approach to, getting that 20% up to 50%, up to 80% to get the whole room engaged?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, it is... I don't know if introverts versus everybody's on a spectrum, right? But there is a default in our culture, in our Western culture, by and large, that values quickness, speed, time off the mark, right? I certainly, my family valued lively conversation at the dinner table, and my dad wanted me to be smart, right? Quick and clever, right? And that is one type of intelligence, right? So the first thing that I would say to those leaders is acknowledge that stewed food can be just as delicious as stir-fried, flash-cooked food, right? Like, if we're going to work on the being side first and say, like, is it valuable for someone to get some time to ruminate? Like, do good ideas come out of rumination, or do only good ideas come out of eureka moments? And we all know that both are possible. I think it's Scott Birkin who wrote the myth of innovation, and this idea of like, the eureka moment, right? Well, the eureka moment was a product of years of thought. Right, the light bulb moment, the Newton and the apple. Like, there's all of these stories of flashes of insight, and we still have the wrong mental model when it comes to creativity. And so what I would first say to every leader, if they are trying to get creative solutions from their team, we have to create the conditions for creativity, and assume that these myths are true, that all we have to do is have an apple, have a light bulb, sit in a bathtub, and like Archimedes and say, Eureka. That's where Eureka, if people don't know, that's where Eureka came from. I think it's Greek for I found it. He realized that water displacement was the best way to determine whether or not the king's golden crown was pure gold, whether it displaced, water, density equivalent of pure gold or an alloy. Very clever method of figuring out the density of this king's crown. It took him a while to think about it. And not for nothing, the bathtub was a place of relaxation.
So perfect.
Newton underneath the tree was journaling and relaxing and reflecting on a sunny English summer's day while trying to escape the diseased crowdedness of London.
Hey, by the way, real quick, imagine in that same scenario that you just described, that he was being interrupted every 2 minutes with a ding from his smartphone and had to
exactly.
Respond.
So correct. Right. So if we're really trying to create the conditions for creativity, well, should we just all take a bath? Not together, right? Like, how do I actually get people into the mood, into the mental space? How do I actually get them to be curious? And so we really think about the whole conversation as a wave. And then we have to build the conversational way. We have to get people into the room. We have to get people into the mood. We have to give them space and time to think, and maybe get them to cross-fertilize their ideas with other people after they've had some time to think. And then maybe map them up somehow. I mean, this is just like they're basic structures that help people do this. Think, pair, share, right? 1, 2, 4 all. Some of the basic patterns of like think by yourself, pair up with somebody and talk about what you just thought. See if you can generate some, where do we align? Where are we different? Pair up with another pair and then share with everyone else. These are like very basic structures, but that's on the do side, right? That's the do loop. There's nothing wrong with the do loop. The do loop will be helpful, but unless you have the perspective of, I need to create space and time for people to be curious and for the good stuff to percolate up, because goodness takes a little bit of time. And, that's what cooking is all about, right? There's nothing wrong with raw steak and raw tuna, right? Seared tuna is great. And so is beef stew. They're different, right? But if you really want to get the sweetness out of an onion, my mom taught me, have you ever had onion jam, William? It's delicious. So you really cook an onion low and slow. You just stir it and you add some more oil and you deglaze the pan. All the sugar in the onion caramelizes and you just basically have onion jam. It's delicious. And that's what creativity can be like. If you really want to get the best out of people, sometimes it's going to take some time to cook it out.
So Daniel,
and that's that's my mental model, right? It's like, do I have the right mental model? It's like, all right, everybody, let's circle up. Let's get some goddamn ideas. All right, William, what do you think? Daniel, you, Susan. Okay, William's too slow. Susan, how about you? And that's like one model of creativity, and I think it's not always the best model for coming up with the best ideas.
Right, because the business is almost kind of reinforcing that, right? Like you just said it and just showcased it, right? Hurry up, speed up. Marketplace forces, business under pressure, business going to IT. I need digital transformation. I need it now,
urgency,
and fast. Urgency. And you get into the meeting, and 80% of the group is thinking about it. You guys are moving too slow. Why you guys so quiet? Why don't you be like the other 10%?
Yeah, exactly.
Who came up with quick ideas.
Yeah. So squeeze it out of them. That's the best way.
Then it crash.
And for all, So the best way to get more out of more people is to just create a little bit of simmering time, I would say. And if everybody has to write something down, using tools like Mural or Miro or any kind of digital whiteboard, I would say if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. Especially for distributed teams. Air talk, as I like to call it, is like, speaking is like writing in the water. Right? You said like what I said isn't what you heard, but if I write down what I meant and draw a picture with it, and like that's my sticky note on my digital whiteboard, there's a record of what I said. And there's a much greater chance of, since we can read at 250 words per minute, if we actually have a silent meeting, I can send you an article about silent meetings. I'm a big fan of silent meetings. That's a great way of making sure everyone's heard, is nobody talks.
I love it.
Maybe it's counterintuitive, but a silent meeting, it's actually how Amazon and Google often run large chunks or portions of their meetings, is using a large amount of silence on the front end for people to do a table read and commenting round. And if you do a silent meeting, or a chunk of your meeting is a silent meeting, it provides tremendous space for cognitive processing, especially because we can read easily twice as fast as we can speak. So just from a conversation operating system perspective, if we're having a spoken conversation, our throughput rate is going to be half what our throughput rate can be if we're having a reading based conversation. If we switch our conversation operating system from spoken to written conversations, which is totally a type of conversation, hands up, if you've ever written a letter back and forth to somebody, if anybody's had a pen pal, like, it's a thing. You can have a written conversation. I've had conversations with people in Google Docs comments, right? So if you have that kind of a meeting, you're actually having a meeting that's potentially twice as efficient, just from a brain processing speed perspective. So I think that's a great way to redesign the operating system of your conversations, for sure. And then really guarantees that everybody is contributing.
Right.
Of course, the easiest way to make sure that everybody is contributing is what I call the placemat approach. If there's 6 people in the room, you make 6 areas on your digital whiteboard, put their name on each one of those 6 areas, and just put 3 sticky notes under each one of those areas and say, okay, everybody has to come up with 3 ideas. And you can just see if everybody's done it. Does William have 2 blank sticky notes or 1 blank sticky note? And if I give you 5 minutes and you've got 2, I say, yeah, it's fine. 2's great. But I've certainly gotten more than if I just said, all right, everybody, pop quiz, whip around the room. So the placemat method is maybe the most mechanical but extremely reliable way of making sure that if we're thinking alone, it's very clear that everybody's producing, quote unquote, the output that I need from them.
So it's like a good spot to kind of just reinforce this business case at the board level. Like, hey, why should I care about this? But now if I'm starting to translate now is, if I invest in my people, invest in my leaders, help everybody all the way down to the front lines, have better conversations, have better meetings, get larger number of people contributing, generating more innovative ideas. We can do it faster, quicker, more efficiently. Our teams work faster, quicker. We can do more innovation digitally with technology, and all the way at the bottom line, we can get to market faster. That's like a really powerful, powerful business case for like everybody saying, hey, let's look at our conversation structure. Look how we facilitate these meetings, our groups, our team interactions, and let's dig in. So what are you seeing in the marketplace right now? Are people like getting it at that business level, that change is needed and needed now?
I wish I could say yes. I think there's still, what's that old saying about how like the future is already here? It's just not evenly distributed. I think for smaller companies, digital first companies, digitally enabled companies, younger companies, the adaptation to some of the technology that makes some of these conversations possible is really accelerated. And I think what I see in some larger organizations is they just don't have the ability, like using something like Google Docs, which is like, honestly, kind of a clunky tool in some ways, but also like extremely effective in another. I know so many organizations where they literally are not allowed to use it, right? They just cannot use Google Docs. It took 6 months for Mural, a tool like Mural, to make it through the IT security checkpoints for some big organizations that I've worked with in the past, where they're just literally this tremendously slow timeline to be able to get some of the tooling that makes these conversational styles easy, right? And that is tough. And then when they get the tools, they don't really know exactly how to do it. And so I think there's always there are definitely people who this is how they run things. This is how they do it. Anytime I say this is how we do it, William, I just can't not hear Montel Jordan in my head. It's important. This is how we do it. All right. You're welcome, everybody. That's in your head now. But so I think some people just have that culture. And for large organizations, it can be a struggle. Especially companies that, they say, oh, we're client focused. I've worked with some organizations that are in client services, and they just have a very hard time creating and protecting space for internal thinking and internal skills building, and just having any kind of intentional process-based conversation, because they're constantly getting pulled out to put out fires. And so I think some people are waking up to it. And I think there's also still some people who are like, God, this isn't as good as when we were in person. And no offense, guys, but like, I'm sorry, it's different. And this is a reality that especially, and for the people who've, work in global distributed organizations, this has been the reality for decades. Right. And I think there are ways to adapt to this reality and to take advantage of this reality, but it has to be done with a very nimble mindset and with nimble technology. And some organizations are able to make that happen. and others, I think, just struggle with it. And they're still having a lot of very basically dysfunctional day-to-day meetings.
I have a surprise.
So highly undistributed future.
Are you surprised that when the DevOps movement was happening, I almost thought there was to be a wave across all of IT. It would spill over into the business where you have people doing daily stand-ups and sprints. I would thought by now, like everybody would be more participation, more updating, more innovation. Are you surprised that DevOps hasn't really spilled out further all across IT and across the organization? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I can't speak to, I think you have a lot more knowledge and on the ground with that. I feel like, there's so many aspects of Scrum and Agile that are just basically good modalities. But I think there's always this tension between command and control and emergent, to create a truly empowered team that can direct itself to create value versus this is the way we want things done and this is what we want made. It can be really, really challenging. And I just think it's not an insolvable challenge, but it does require very advanced skills from the leadership to be able to create the right boundaries and openness. And I think what happens all the time is that you do a session for people in the middle of the organization and they say, God, who should really be here?
Oh, yes.
Right. And so this is one of the reasons why I think I enjoy or value working with doing executive coaching with senior leaders, is that in order to have a real change, people need to lead in different ways. And so it's not just about the people in the middle saying, we'd like to do this way. There's still this push and there's still these guardrails put up. And so I think, yes, I'm surprised, but also I'm not surprised.
So it seems like we have lots and lots of opportunity here. So always tell IT professionals there's a lot of different roles that have not been created yet, with new titles which haven't been created yet. For some who don't want to put hands on keyboard and just run traditional meetings, it sounds like there's a lot of coaching opportunities for them or learning opportunities to kind of figure out how can they design, facilitate, make teams more efficient. So if you're projecting 10 years from now, IT professionals, they're making all this new cool technology work in new and amazing ways. I can almost see some of your fingerprints on some of the new thinking about how we're talking day to day, finding new problems, finding new workarounds, and then just working those solutions back up the chain and eventually get back out to the business, right? They can actually market that and make more money.
Yeah.
So you're doing there's some great things out there. I think a lot of CIOs and CTOs and CDOs can learn a lot here. So they wanted to reach out to you, Daniel. How would they find you?
I'm very easily findable on the internet, as it just so happens. The easiest way is to go to danielstillman.com. That's my name, and that's my website. And you can learn all about my stuff there. There's easy ways to get in touch with me there. You can tweet at me if you. This is like what customer service through social media, which we've all had to do. It's like at Bonobo, I won't name a company, but I'm like, hey, where's my package? And they're like, oh, geez, we should totally work on that. So you can always tweet at me, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I write a lot, and if people comment on something or reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, it's a great way to find me there too. Those are 3 good places. And they can also, if you go to danielstillman.com, you can check out my book.
Nice.
Good Talk, How to Design Conversations That Matter. That's a great way to get in touch with me because I basically downloaded my whole brain circa 2019. Everything I knew about conversation design is put in there, much like Sauron poured all of his malice into the One Ring. I have poured all of my love and all of the insights about designing conversations into that book. And I'm actually talking with someone today who's we're going to attempt to make a chatbot from the book. It's very amusing.
Interesting.
Idea to say, like, you can, because who has time to read a whole book? You can just chat GPT me. More and more people are going to be doing this thing, right? Conversations, another way to think about, we didn't even talk about conversations with digital things, right? Which is obviously changing the conversations we're having with ourselves. We all can't bear to sit in a bar and not know the answer to something when we know we can Google it. And now we can chat GPT it, which is even better / worse. But yeah, people can find me at danielstillman.com. Happy to reach out. Happy to talk to people if they think I can be helpful to them. And as they seek to redesign their conversations more elegantly, joyfully, beautifully, efficiently, effectively, etc. Whatever their aspiration is. I'm happy to have a chat with them.
Yeah, I love our time together. We definitely could go on hours. We'll have to have you back for continue this conversation.
Absolutely. As you can tell, I love to talk about this stuff. If anybody is thinking about writing a book, I would say just make sure you really want to talk about it for the next couple of years. And I do. I love this stuff because it's really important.
Very important.
It's our whole lives. Our whole lives.
Very important. Our
conversations, and not just at work, at home. My God, those ones matter even more.
Well, thank you for your time today, Daniel. And enjoyed having you on another episode of the Smart IT podcast. So if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe and leave messages. And if you want to hear more about Smart IT, head over to my website at williamreed.info. Until the next episode, take care. Thanks for joining another episode of the Smart IT podcast, where we explore what's next for IT and disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk together. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments. And for more Smart IT wisdom, check out my website at williamreed.info.